Another weekend goes by and another MotoGP race with it as well. And this one wasn't without action either. Welcome along. This is indeed the Crash MotoGP podcast. The recording date is Monday, the 21st of March. My name is Harry Benjamin. Alongside me, Crash MotoGP editor Pete McLaren and former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Hewin. Coming up, a wet Indonesia hosted MotoGP for the first time and just about got underway, and it was a spectacular win for Miguel Oliveira in horrendous conditions. KTM looking good. Fabio Quartararo muscled his Yamaha onto the podium as well, but where were Honda? And what about Marc Marquez? Another serious incident ruled him out of taking part in the race. We'll be discussing all of that and more, including Moto 2 and Moto 3. But first, just a few points of order before we dive into all the action. We had a lot of messages about some potential sound issues. Thank you for them coming through. I've been informed they've been fixed by the higher ups in our editing team, so apologies for those, but should be all fixed as well. And also last week I blame Keith and Pete for not picking me up on this. There was a question about Kenny Roberts and his knee down technique, and in the moment I believe I actually said Kenny Rogers. Now of course I meant Roberts the rider, not the country music singer, which of course that was picked up on. So meant Roberts, but Rogers was the thing that came out. So I'll blame you two for that. We'll skip over it though. I'm glad everyone picked up on it. Thank you for all the comments. Kenny Rogers on a motorbike, I'd like to see that. Right. MotoGP action,
you know what,
Pete.
Harry,
We're in Indonesia.
I did actually hear it, Harry, but I thought I didn't. I thought, no, I'm not going to say nothing. You didn't say that, surely.
You're being too kind.
It's only when it came out later, I thought, he did say it.
He did say Kenny Rogers. He did. Anyway, right, Roberts. Thank you for the question that came in either way. MotoGP, though, in Indonesia. Let's get through it. Keith, first time in Indonesia. We spoke about it last week. Worries about the track, but it turned into an absolute deluge anyway with the wet weather. What were your taking away? What have you been taking away from MotoGP's first visit to Indonesia? How do you think it all went?
Lombok, I mean, Mandalika, at the end of the day, it was one of those ones where we didn't really know until everybody got there this week what kind of condition everything was going to be in. I mean, 32 hours door to door from the UK here. It's a long way away. And that being that far away from Jakarta was always a question as well for me, because Sentul was, we've had an Indonesian Grand Prix a long time ago. So Sentul would have been the natural home, I'd have thought, for the Grand Prix. But of course, this new area, this new development that this is in the middle of, was favoured by the local government and local authorities, and they spent a lot of money on it. We heard about the track breaking up and the like. That is still an issue, but not quite as big an issue, perhaps, as it really, really could have been. We might have not had a MotoGP race if it had been as bad as it was just a few weeks ago, some 5 weeks ago. The weather, what can you say about the weather? You know, it's that time of the year. You know, we're at the start of the difficult time where it gets really, really hot and the rain starts to come and the like. Marc Marquez, you mentioned Marc Marquez. Bloody hell, warm up. I thought he decided to fly home early, because honestly, that was a high side and a half. I mean, that kid is taking some beatings at the moment. I mean, I really, really don't know which way this is all going to go. We questioned whether we might not see Mark again after the eye injury, whether he'd be able to come back from that, whether it would repair itself in time for him to be able to race again. And now these kind of clouts, he's taken another concussion. You know, that's a very, very serious thing to have, as bad as it was. I mean, when he stood up from that, you held your breath. I mean, have you ever seen Marc Marquez look injured when he is injured? You know, like he staggered around in the middle of the road like he was literally punch drunk, which was really, really worrying. Anyway, the right thing was done. He was taken out of the situation, flown home early. Mandalika seems to have been a success. Most of the people I know that when they got there, all the reports I was getting from on trackside, they hated it. The journey, you know, the weather was so incredibly warm. The place wasn't really finished. I mean, we saw the best parts of it on TV, obviously, but it wasn't really finished. Not enough hotels nearby. But by the end of the week, They loved it. I mean, I've got people that, have changed their flights to stay out there longer because it is in a lovely part of the world. The people, and that's what makes an event like this, really, at the end of the day, the people that they're dealing with, the Indonesians, have been brilliant, have really looked after everybody really, really well. So from the human side of things, away from the racing, it seems to have been a massive, massive success. When you get a Southeast Asian, Asia Pacific, whatever it is, region, you've got the Indomitsu team winning the Moto2 race. Somkiat Chantra, a Thai rider, first Thai ever to win a Grand Prix. I mean, that has just lit the region. Buriram, they must be happy as hell over there in Thailand, because at the end of the day, when we get to Buriram, the Thais are going to come out in force. They're going to be there. The place is going to be sold out. There is no doubt about it. So if you ain't got a ticket for Thailand right now and you are intending on going out there, get it done, because you won't be able to get a hotel room. It's going to be a nightmare from that point of view, because they support their own. The win from Miguel Oliveira, brilliant. What's that? His fourth win now. KTM coming back. Yamaha being there or thereabouts as well, with Quartararo looking so good. I mean, it was just one of those races. I think what happens is whenever we predict something, it obviously isn't ever going to happen. When you, me and Pete get down to making a prediction, forget it. It's going to be a complete waste of time. My favourite part of it, though,
pick up on the points.
Had to be the Shaman.
You get 1
Harry.
point.
It had to. Who got 1 point?
You did.
Had to be the Shaman. That was my favourite part of it. The woman that, what they are is that they I mean, this is a major belief they have in that region. The shaman is hired in to move the clouds. So if you've got a wedding or a big event, they are hired. This is a serious thing, believe it or not. To us, it seems incredible. So you got this shaman that's out there, and she's banging her pot and sort of trying to get rid of the weather, and unfortunately, absolutely slashed it down. So much for her credibility. I think her marketplace has just kind of took a bit of a dive. But then, of course, she, as is typical again for perhaps that part of the world, in that she stood in the rain in her bare feet on the start and finish line, banging her pot and waving her bits and pieces about. And of course, the rain did stop. But then again, it was always going to, wasn't it? Because that's what happens in those kind of conditions. So make of that what you like. But it turned into a good event, not quite a great event, but a good event, I think, for most people.
Yeah, the rain did stop in the end, didn't it? But it was a reduced lap time for the reduced amount of laps, I should say, for the all classes, I think, in the end, and in particular MotoGP. Before we come on to the actual race action, Pete, I'll bring you in on this as well. Let's just talk about Marc Marquez and that huge incident before the race getting underway. Massive high side, as Keith brings up. And I want to bring in a couple of points and a question from Johnny, who has said, has Marc lost his mind? He couldn't seem to understand I'm not fast, so he kept pushing as the crashes got worse. He might push himself into retirement or worse if he can't get his head around his current capability. How accurate do you think that sort of summation is? But also, on top of that, this was a test as well for MotoGP's new regulations about the rider concussion and how safe it is for them to get back on a bike. And it seems there couldn't really be any other option than not to allow Marc to race.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, the right decision was taken. As Keith says, when you've got a guy staggering around, you can't then, we've been told it's going to be stricter this year, you can't release him a couple of hours later. So, yeah, right decision taken. As far as Marc's accidents, I think the thing to step back to the start of the weekend, Honda really struggled with these modified Michelin tyres. Now, we knew after the test, it's not a surprise that Michelin needed to change the tyres. That's what happens. You go to a track for the first time, you have a test, and then usually you swap some tyres. So, you maybe the soft is too soft, which is what we were hearing. People were saying, well, the soft compound rear probably won't be back. So they did their race simulations on the medium. So maybe you swap the soft for a harder tyre, that kind of thing. What happened here is that they modified all of the casings, and they went back to a casing they'd last used at Buriram 2018. The reason for that was the heat. It was just so hot. It's a fast track. They were getting blistering. So what you ended up with was basically all of the tyres on the rear were unfamiliar, let's say, to the teams and the riders. And we've seen this sort of general trend of the tyre construction getting softer. It's just been the way that it's gone in recent years. And you've got Honda in this case, we're talking about Marc. So Honda sort of finally cracked how to get the most out of this softer construction rear tyre. It seems like their bike's working really well on it from what we've seen in testing and Qatar and things like that. Now suddenly they have this stiffer construction, and it just didn't work with their bike. Maybe if they had more time, they could have made it work. But the thing to remember is when Marc fell, he was on a new soft rear tire. So this is not like Marc was trying to use, a hard tire, or that he was trying to put a race distance on a soft. If the analysis that we're all given after the sessions is right, it was about his third lap on a new soft rear tire. Now the problem that the Hondas have been having was this rear locking, as they called it, going into the corners, and they weren't alone in that. Joan Mir said, "Look, I had 2 or 3 incidents similar to Marc." So he said I had a similar thing. So they weren't alone in that. But what we saw is that some teams, Ducati, KTM, seemed to really like this new tyre. And then we saw Yamaha kind of say the same, at least with Quartararo. He matched his best lap time, at the test with the pole position and things like that. And then we saw, as we see, Honda really struggled. The Suzukis, Aprilia seemed to be about the same. We didn't get to see the race, obviously, so we don't know what they would have done over a race distance, but the riders sounded fairly happy Saturday evening. So that was what happened. He just sort of shuffled the pack, if that makes sense. And the Honda guys just never really felt they were in a position where they could get this tyre to work in a safe manner. And I think Marc being Marc, he's never going to give up, is he? You know what he's like. He's going to keep pushing. And that's what happened. He made clear, this is on Saturday night, I'll need to go on the attack. He qualified 15th. That would have been 14th because Morbidelli got demoted a place, didn't he? So, but still, his only chance was to really go on the attack from the start with the soft rear tyre. So you can imagine that Marc, clearly he was pushing, perhaps getting ready for the race situation. We know Keith had explained in the preview of the event, narrow, clean line on this track. Overtaking was not going to be easy. So Marc's maybe he's got that in his mind. He was pushing, and clearly, he got caught out in a spectacular way. And he's obviously going to have further checks when he gets back to Spain. But fortunately, he at least walked away.
What's worth bearing in mind, I think, as well, lads, is that Marc Marquez, he rides a motorcycle really loose. I mean, we can't see physically where that bike is letting go. He will have been riding it right on the edge already. He will have been close to a crash because that's how he rides every single corner anyway. That's how Marc Marquez rides it. In the past, he's always been able to save it. Even when you visually can see the thing tucking under or hanging out the back, Marc has been able to save 90% of those in the past. We're in an era where Marc is becoming almost like a normal rider, and when it gets to that situation, he crashes just like a normal rider. So I think that there's a combination of things going on here. But most of these guys, anyway, to put a time in, those motorbikes are right on the very edge of adhesion, obviously, but right on the very edge. The things are moving already. Marc normally will ride like that, and he will save that every single time. We're just in an era at the moment where he can't. The bike isn't really his. Honda have changed it a little bit as well. Like you say, Michelin have made those changes, which don't suit him at the moment. Do you remember when we went from Bridgestone to Michelin's? I went to the Sepang tests, the first Sepang test, where all of the factories suddenly had Michelin tyres. And the bias went from having an absolutely incredible front tyre and not such a good back tyre to the opposite way around with Michelin. It was more of a balanced situation. You had never seen so many top riders crash in all your given days. Honestly, I'd never seen such carnage. The amount of millions of pounds worth of damage that must have been done in that test until they dialed in what they needed for the Michelins. And Marc's really a bit in that position. Things have changed since he was top dog, and he hasn't really caught up yet. And add that injury to him, only he knows how he feels in his head, how he sees things. And we've seen Marc before. He kind of closes that communication line down, doesn't he? He doesn't show, in the past, he's not shown pain to people, even when he obviously clearly is he must be in a lot of pain. He's one of these guys that shuts all that down. His team are quite tight as well, so you don't get that information coming out of the back door of the garages. How's Marc? No one will say anything. Yeah, he's absolutely fine. You won't get information. So we don't really know what's going on with Marc physically or mentally at this moment in time. His eyesight, is it absolutely perfect? You just don't know these things. These are variables at the minute that Marc's got to get over. I mean, it will be terrible if we lose Marc Marquez from a competitor through injury, but he can't go on beating himself up in this manner. He cannot continue to keep taking these heavy hits. As young as he well, he isn't. He's mid-20s young, I suppose it is still. But every year it's cumulative. Every year you get more and more injury clambering on top of an older body, and before you know where you are, you can't perform at the level that you've been able to before. I don't think we're there yet, but it's early. It's only the second round, for God's sake, and he's taken another big hit.
And probably just worth saying, Keith, that also that's kind of the nightmare accident where the traction control is of no use to you, is it? Because he hadn't got to the point where he was actually opening the throttle, so there's no electronics to help you out. It's that situation where you're kind of relying on the tyre sticking to the ground as you go into the corner. And we probably should also say that Michelin, they're adamant that the choice they made with this tyre was the right one. They point to the lap times, they point to the performance of the tyre, and they believe that still it was the safest. But clearly, for the Honda riders and also Suzuki guys, they had a tough time on it. And I think in future there'll certainly be a debate about whether, let's say, new tyres should be introduced without at least some sort of test beforehand for teams to just get up to speed with them, and be a bit more aware of what they've got.
I think that's absolutely critical. I think that it's wrong that riders and teams should be expected to, especially on a no data track like this one. We've had one test which wasn't particularly successful, and we're straight into a race meeting. We've talked about it before. You're qualifying for qualifying. Free practice isn't a free practice. It's not a wobble round to go and see where everything goes. Free practice is got to go as fast as you can to get in the top 10, so you go through the Q2 straight away. I mean, it's not a simple task. There is not enough track time for these guys to get up to speed with stuff like data, with safe options, working your way through it. So I absolutely agree with that there should be test time. Even if it's the day before, there should be time, a proper free practice where it is like, okay, it's timed, but it doesn't count towards anything come Friday's free practice and then Saturday's qualifying. Agreed, Pete.
These new, these changed rear compound tyres as well, affecting multiple drivers, as you say, also affected the Pramac riders, but in two different ways. Zarco really